Hey babe, last night was pure chaos, wasn't it? Even now, I can still feel the tension crackling in the air, as though it has seeped into the walls and refuses to dissipate. It was one of those nights where every word spoken felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each sentence threatening to topple an already precarious house of cards. Our attempts at choosing our words carefully didn't help, because it seemed like every utterance sparked a fresh explosion, like a small fire set ablaze by a gust of wind. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with a force that seemed far larger than any of us. And once it all began, there was no stopping the inevitable fallout. But the most unsettling part wasn't just the tension itself, it was the sheer potency of the third party's anger toward me. It was more than irritation. It was a tsunami of rage, drowning everything in its path before we even knew what hit us. When I looked into her eyes, I saw something that went far beyond a short temper. It was a depth of fury that seemed to have been festering for a long time, waiting for precisely the right spark to set it loose. And last night, that spark came in the form of raw truth, the kind of truth that shatters illusions and leaves broken shards scattered everywhere. I recall how every muscle in my body tensed the moment she fixed her gaze on me. Her expression was a volatile blend of hurt, frustration, and an eagerness to lash out, as though a dam had finally burst and she was powerless to contain the deluge. In that moment, I had a fleeting thought: there would be no turning back from this. Sometimes, arguments serve as a release, a way for tensions to dissipate so people can move on. But this felt different, like the first rumble of an earthquake that foretells something much larger. How did we arrive at such a point? I keep replaying the events in my mind, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when the conversation spiraled so out of control. Was it a single word, a gesture, or just the weight of all the words left unspoken over the years? The truth is, it wasn't any one thing. It was a complex web of grievances and resentments, all of which converged on that night. Perhaps it was my confession that triggered the explosion, my blunt admission that seeing her felt like a reminder of every mistake I've ever made. It was a confession that had been burning a hole inside me for too long, one I was terrified to voice because I knew once it was out, it would change everything. It's surreal how a few words can hold so much power. The moment I said it, I could almost feel the energy in the room shift. Her eyes flickered with an emotion that started as shock, then morphed into something darker and more volatile. As the seconds ticked by, her face twisted into an expression of pure rage. I knew it crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and there was a heavy sense of finality about it, like a door slamming shut on the old version of our relationship. Words have a peculiar way of opening old wounds. There was a flicker of pain in her eyes, a glimpse of something more vulnerable buried under the fury. For a heartbeat, I wondered if she felt vindicated, if she had suspected this all along but needed me to say it out loud. If she had carried her own weight of insecurities, hearing my confession might have been the final straw confirming her worst fears. That's the thing about truth. It's liberating, but also destructive. It can offer clarity while simultaneously wrecking whatever thin veneer of stability was holding everything together. After that initial shock, her fury erupted like a volcano. She hurled words at me, vicious, stinging words that resonated with a kind of intensity I hadn't heard from her before. It wasn't just anger, it was betrayal, bitterness, and heartbreak rolled into a single, searing outburst. The air felt stifling, almost suffocating, as though the environment itself couldn't withstand the combined heat of her rage and the tension between us. Each of her accusations sliced through me, echoing in my ears long after the sound left her mouth. Even in the midst of this onslaught, part of me felt a strange sense of relief. It'd been lugging around this confession like a weighted vest, each day adding a little more mass until it was nearly impossible to breathe. Keeping something like that locked away in my mind had become toxic, not just for me, but also for the dynamic between us. Sometimes, the truth has to escape, even if it arrives in a cataclysmic manner. In that sense, I feel as though my words were an exorcism of sorts, forcibly expelling the ghosts of my past mistakes. But with relief came guilt. I could see the hurt in her eyes, hear the quiver in her voice when she screamed back at me. I knew deep down that by letting loose my truth, I was effectively placing a heavy burden on her. She looked at me as though I had betrayed something sacred, even if it had never promised to shield her from my real feelings. Yet, honesty can sometimes be the cruelest path to healing. It doesn't come neatly packaged or decorated with polite bows. It arrives like a sudden storm, tearing through facades and illusions without mercy. In the thick of it all, I felt your presence too, your eyes darting between us, your concern palpable. I could sense your conflicted emotions, wanting to step in, yet perhaps also knowing that this confrontation was inevitable. There's a helplessness that comes when you watch two people you care about unravel right in front of you. I don't blame you for the silence, for not knowing exactly how to diffuse a situation this fraught. Sometimes, stepping in can do more harm than good, especially when the currents of anger are this strong. Even after the storm subsided momentarily, the air was still thick with unresolved tension. She paced around, hurling more accusations that grew increasingly personal, as though determined to rip me apart for daring to speak the unspeakable. I stood there, numb, grappling with my own conflicting emotions: relief, guilt, sadness, and a strange, defiant sense of resolution. I knew I had started down a path that there was no easy way to veer from, and I sensed that she would continue pursuing me with her anger until she felt vindicated. Sometimes, I ask myself why I couldn't have said it differently, softened the blow, or tried to couch it in gentler language. But would that have changed anything? I doubt it. The crux of my statement, that she symbolizes the mistakes I can't seem to forget, wasn't something that could be prettied up. Even if I had tried to soften it, she would have sensed the underlying sentiment. When a sentiment is that potent, no amount of sugarcoating can mask it. But why did I say it really? Maybe it was partly to free myself from a suffocating dynamic, but also to challenge her image of herself in my life. She's always been a presence that reminded me of who I was, not who I am trying to become. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to sever ties with the past. It hoped, perhaps naively, that airing this out would be a turning point, a chance for both of us to step back and recognize the toxicity in maintaining a connection defined by regret and resentment. In the aftermath, I find myself oscillating between a sense of liberation and an almost overwhelming sense of dread. Liberation, because I no longer feel like I have to hide my true feelings every time I'm around her. Dread, because I know this confrontation has awakened something in her that won't easily be calmed. Anger that runs this deep tends to feed on itself, perpetuating a cycle where each person's hurt justifies inflicting more hurt on the other. I keep asking myself what comes next. Is it possible for us to rebuild or redefine the relationship now that all pretense is shattered? Or have I effectively burned a bridge that was already teetering on the edge of collapse? My gut tells me that the odds of salvaging a healthy connection might be slim. Perhaps there's a small window where we could hash things out, truly listening to each other's perspectives. But that would require a willingness to step outside our emotional walls, walls that have only grown thicker since last night. In the quieter moments after the storm, I noticed her watching me with an expression I can only describe as wounded defiance. She seemed determined to refuse any attempt at reconciliation, at least for now. And maybe that's for the best. Sometimes, a cooling off period is necessary before anyone can have a clear conversation about what happened and why. Still, a part of me wonders if her anger is too consuming for her to ever look at me without seeing betrayal. As for me, I'm left with the echoes of her accusations. Everything she said about me, the ways she painted me as a villain who used honesty as a weapon. To some extent, I see her point. Delivering the truth without warning and in the midst of an intense argument can feel weaponized. But I can't escape the sense that I was compelled to do it, that the weight had become unsustainable, and last night was the moment it all broke free. Sometimes, the truth arrives in the most inconvenient forms. In the wake of this confrontation, I also find myself reflecting on how easily we project our insecurities onto others. If she's so deeply enraged by what I said, maybe it's because she too views herself through the lens of her own regrets and sees me as a reminder of them. The irony is thick here. Perhaps we each represent the other's baggage, each reflecting something the other wants to forget. And in that sense, maybe neither of us could truly move forward without this painful confrontation. What I do know is that I can't go back to pretending. I can't return to biting my tongue and feigning civility. If we're going to maintain any semblance of a relationship, or even just a distant civility, we both have to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that surfaced last night. That process is likely to be messy. Real growth often is. We may need distance, time, and a willingness to dissect some painful realities. There's no quick fix for this kind of rupture. Despite the chaos and the heartbreak, I find a small seed of hope in the possibility that by airing our deepest grievances, we've at least opened a door to genuine honesty. If she can find it in herself to express her pain without resorting to endless retaliation, and if I can stand firm in my truth without lashing back defensively, maybe, just maybe, we can reach an understanding. It's a tall order, especially in the immediate aftermath of such a blow-up, but stranger things have happened. For now, though, we're both left to deal with the wreckage. The words have been said, the feelings are raw, and the path forward is unclear at best. It hurts to think that our relationship might never recover from this. But at the same time, it might be a necessary step for both of us to break free from an invisible chain that's been holding us back. Sometimes, it's through destruction that we find room for reinvention. So yes, babe, last night was pure chaos. It was a vortex of tension, a wildfire of anger, and the release of a truth I could no longer keep caged. The third party's fury was almost tangible, filling the room with enough heat to scorch any hope of a peaceful resolution in that moment. My words, for better or worse, shattered the fragile calm we'd been clinging to. Now we're left to sift through the ashes, carrying conflicting emotions of relief, guilt, fear, and perhaps a slender thread of hope. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it's far from over. But maybe, just maybe, this storm was the only way to clear the ground for whatever needs to come next.